Here with more on the looming government shutdown is Joe Minarik, I should say, Senior Vice President at the Committee for Economic Development, a nonprofit research organization. He was also Chief Economist in the U.S. Office of Management and Budget under President Clinton. Welcome. The nice thing about having that past history is that maybe you can frame things, because you worked up on the Hill before you worked for President Clinton. And of course, that was in 95 and 96, if I'm not mistaken, when the last shutdowns were. Yep. So talk to me about how poisonous the environment was there up on the Hill versus now. It looks like it's deteriorated even more this time around.
Well, back in 95 and 96, people were trying to find, there were differences of opinion on numbers. The nice thing about numbers is you can take the two positions, divide them by two, and figure out there's something in the middle. Right now, we're talking about a difference between yes and no. It's hard to find a statutory language compromise between yes and no. Affordable care, Obamacare, or nothing. And it's going to be very, very difficult to work this out.
The President of the United States has basically said, I'm digging my heels in, I'm not moving on this. Was that sort of Clinton's approach too back in the 90s? Is this a winning strategy?
The President has a lot of authority in these positions. He is the one guy with the press room, the bully pulpit. He can walk out there, he can get attention in a way that oftentimes the Congress cannot, and that does make a difference.
Right now we're looking at a live picture and you can see the Speaker of the House, Speaker Boehner, up there speaking. How is he going to handle this? It seems as though it's interesting because people look at a democracy and they think, well, it's majority rules, and yet there are some who are contending it's the minority of the minority. This is the minority party, and yet it's a minority wing within the minority that seems to be driving things.
When you take a House majority, which in theory can do absolutely anything it wants, anytime it wants, and you take a faction of that majority that holds the balance, they suddenly discover that they have an awful lot of power. And so you have a slice of the House majority, and the majority in total is pretty narrow. You know, they have about 12, 15, 20 votes to spare, and you got 40 people within that majority who want to do something very different. And they can take the authority away from the majority, and the Speaker is trying to figure out how to make that work. He's got the problem that the base of the Republican Party, the ideological extreme, the people who show up for primary elections, are in with that 40-member segment of his party. And so he can't get crosswise with them and maintain his own position. So he's trying to balance with those guys. He's trying to convey to them the experience that he had back in 95 and 96 when the Republican majority essentially had its hat handed to them. And he's not, at this point, able to get that information across.
Talk to me about the fallout from an economic standpoint, because you are one of those guys who knows how to crunch the numbers and everything. What does this do to the U.S. economy? How long can the government go on with this government shutdown before you start to see the ripple effect throughout society and some devastating impacts?
Well, the guys who run the big models will tell you that a week is probably going to cost you something on the order of 0.5% of GDP this quarter. This coming quarter, the fourth quarter of the year. However, you start stretching that out and the effects get a lot bigger. The 95-96 shutdown went almost a month. If you start going that far, particularly in an economy that is as weak as this one, and remember, going back to 1995-96, the economy was essentially pretty much ready to escape Earth orbit. It was very, very strong. That was the economy that grew us all the way to a balanced budget in 1998. Right now, we're not at all in that situation. You still have all of the weaknesses coming from that financial crisis. We shouldn't be monkeying with this situation.
Let me, and we've got probably about 45 seconds, but you know, we have a lot of people around the globe that watch this broadcast and are probably scratching their head trying to figure out things, because this is a democracy where the majority rules. I've already kind of touched on this, but back in April, an emotional President Obama addressed the nation talking about the gun control measure that failed, and he said, sooner or later, we're going to get this right. The memories of these children demanded, talking about the Sandy Hook children who died. And so do the American people. The polling data showed that a majority of Americans were in favor of that. I would suspect that a majority of Americans want their bridges and their roads and their government to function correctly. So why is it that this keeps happening?
We have a significant body of the membership of the House of Representatives who have been districted into absolutely safe party seats. They have absolutely nothing to worry about in a general election. The only thing they have to fear is a primary election. The voters in the primary election tend to come from the very committed ideological extremes. The one thing you cannot do if you want to protect your House seat is let somebody get around the outside of you. So the Republicans tend to be more conservative, the Democrats tend to be more liberal. You can be very successful in your district while taking a policy that will take your national party to ruin. And that may be what's going on right now.
Well, they certainly don't want to get outflanked on the left or the right, but what we're seeing right now is a lot of dysfunction. Joe, thanks so much for coming in. Certainly appreciate it.